And what they were doing in their adulthood now is returning to the scene of the sexual crime. In other words, they were recreating what happened to them in their adult life with other adults. Trauma recovery is embedded in the things you're doing sexually, in addition to the memories that you have about the abuse.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to How to Have Extraordinary Relationships podcast with me, Lucy Cavendish, the host and author of the book, How to Have Extraordinary Relationships. And today I am delighted to be here with Joe Kort. So, Dr. Joe Kort is a licensed clinical sexual author. He writes about everything. He has several books on sex and relationships. He has a podcast. He sees people as clients. He has broken down, I believe he's broken down quite a few barriers around same-sex relationships, around all relationships, around porn, around fantasy. He's an imago therapist, which I know what that means, but that's a very certain system of couples therapy. And we met on an imago conference in Denmark, and I was fascinated. He gave a wonderful presentation. So I've asked him to come on today and tell us more about his work and what he talked about where he's at and all the problems we want answering around sex, porn, and addiction and relationships. It's over to you, Joe.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. Excuse me, Lucy. The things that I like to say about myself is I am teaching what I've learned. So there's a few things that I created myself, but for the most part, I have learned these things as a sex therapist. And I think what happens, I've been a therapist almost 40 years in May. And a lot of therapists get complacent and they don't really update themselves. The language has changed, dynamic has changed, social justice awareness has changed, all that. And I try so hard to keep up with that. And I think I'm a better therapist for it. And you probably do the same.
Yeah, I absolutely believe that. And I think the world of therapy is amazing and fascinating because you constantly have to grow. But a lot of new stuff is coming in now, isn't it? I mean, this idea when I trained that you were a blank slate, you don't have a social presence. I mean, all that's changed. I mean, you're on social media and you're talking a lot to people, aren't you?
Yes, yeah. And I've always been on social media, but my numbers have been really average to low. And then I got on TikTok. And my claim to fame on TikTok that made me famous is that I say that you can be straight men, can have sex with men, and not be gay and not be bi. And it blows people's minds. You know, that was my very first video. And what I say is when a man has one non-heterosexual thought, he's stigmatized. When a woman has one non-heterosexual thought, she's fetishized. Both are problematic. But with women, there's wiggle room. You can be lesbian until graduation. In the States, it's called being a lug, lesbian until graduation during college. For men, if you do it one time, that's your whole life. Now you're no longer, the straight label's removed from you. And it's ridiculous. So I just went with it on there and it became very popular.
So, I mean, tell me about that, because I know you've written about people that come to you and say, I think my husband may be gay, or I mean, I'd love to know more about, because I have clients that have come to me and said, and I'm not bringing any confidentiality, but, they're saying my husband likes to watch porn. And when I looked at what it was, it's gay porn. It's man on man porn.
Yes.
Does that? They're very freaked out by that because they're like, oh my goodness, there's this side of my partner that I had no idea about.
I did it on social media. I said, what do you think the number one worry is when a woman finds her husband has fantasies or looking at gay porn or thinks about men or has even been with men? I always thought it would be, well, what would you think the first worry would be about a woman finding her husband going through that?
Well, I think they think he doesn't. I think they would think they would be worried that he doesn't really desire them, that it's all been a bit of a lie.
Yes.
That actually the marriage is over or the relationship is over.
Right. And that he'll leave. And that surprised me because, I always thought that it was the worry of STIs, STDs, that kind of thing.
Oh, no, we don't worry about that.
Yeah, no, they're worried about it, but it's the primary one is he doesn't desire me and he's going to leave. You can say mostly that's far, far from the truth. Even if he turns out to be gay, a lot of the gay guys want to stay married to her because that's his person and that's whom he loves. I'm not saying it's going to work. It can, it can't. There's a lot of ways to go around all that, but the crisis point is usually that he's no longer straight, and that's not necessarily true.
So how did you discover this? Tell me how you got into your line of work. You know, what got you to this place where you talk so much about all sorts of things that people find it hard to talk about?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the clientele that came my way, the special interest that I have in human sexuality, but about straight men who have sex with men came to me because I was seeing men come in my office who had experienced childhood sexual abuse and trauma from male perpetrators. And what they were doing in their adulthood now is returning to the scene of the sexual crime. In other words, they were recreating what happened to them in their adult life with other adults. So if they were molested in a bathroom, they're going to public restrooms. If they were molested in a certain way of behavior, they're engaging in that kind of behavior with the men. It's not sexual attraction, it's trauma urge. They're different things. One is a trauma repetition, which you know as a therapist, and the other is a healthy sexual interest in something that you're into. And so I started to see these differences. These straight men were going through behaviors with men, but it wasn't the same as gay and bisexual men.
That's so fascinating. So when did that first, when did it first come to you? Okay, this, because it's complicated stuff, isn't it? Because it's taking people back into very difficult places.
Yeah. Just like trauma work does, right? Only now it's sexual. And so for the longest time, I was a sex addiction therapist. I don't believe in that anymore. 25 years of that kind of work, I now realize was a waste of my time. I mean, I learned to be a great trauma therapist in that system. I learned to do a lot of good addiction work, but sex is not an addiction. And when I became a sex therapist and learned about sexual health, I realized that the sexual addiction model is really just conversion therapy for sex. All you're doing is trying to talk somebody through shame and get them to change their what I call their erotic orientation. Let me explain what that is, because you can't change that any more than you can change your sexual orientation. Your sexual orientation is to whom you're attracted. Male, female, both, a blend of both, neither. So I'm gay and I'm attracted to men. But your erotic orientation are the things that turn you on, the things that get you off, and they may be in conflict with your sexual orientation. So we have lesbians that have violent rape fantasies, that would never want to do it, never had it happen, but not even attracted to men, and are feminists on top of it. But the fantasy erotically turns them on. It doesn't make them any less lesbian.
Yes, it also doesn't mean to say they want to be raped. I mean,
Not at all. Not at
exactly.
all. It's a
This is
fantasy.
complicated for people to hear, isn't it? It's people. I think people very much struggle with people's sexual fantasy life. So
Oh yeah,
so
they
it's
can't.
shame. We no, I mean, very few people. Well, maybe that's not true, but I'm talking about a heterosexual community of my experience. They find it, couples come to me and they find it really shameful to talk about their fantasy lives.
They do, and I had the same issue, but I was forced into it because also a trauma survivor, a sexual abuse survivor, and I had a therapist in my 30s, long time ago now, 30 years ago, maybe more. Actually, it is more, where she said, "You're going to have to tell me all your fantasies, and my help for your trauma recovery is embedded in the things you're doing sexually, in addition to the memories that you have about the abuse." And it took me a year because my perpetrator was a female. And so I had picked a female therapist, and it was a very hard situation. But I did it, and I'm grateful to her because it made me more comfortable talking about all that.
Wow, that sounds like it was a big piece of work.
It was huge. And then I just became fascinated like, oh, when you understand the non sexual meanings of the sexual narrative. So I'll give you an example because a lot of therapists don't know how to do this. I have learned from the best of the best on how to do this. It's not always right. There's no cookbook menu for something like this, but you can have clients come in and they might be attracted to, trying to give an example, but also with keeping confidentiality. They might have well, I talked about this in a recent article that I wrote, and it's a mix up, so it's not really a real client. But a man was caught by his wife looking at online porn, and the scenes in the porn were of dominant females, so dominatrix, forcing submissive men to eat her dirty underwear. And it was scene after scene after scene, clip after clip. And she was mortified, right? Disgusted. She didn't know this about her husband. And she was worried that he was doing this with her underwear. And did he want to do it with her underwear? It was a whole thing. They came in crisis. And as a therapist, you probably do this too. In the first few sessions, I do family histories right away so that I can understand, what might be recycled in the present from their past. Well, when he was a little boy, his punishment was that he was force fed hot sauce or soap to discipline him. And he said to me, I wish they didn't do that. I was a reasonable kid. I would have listened to them reasonably. So now I said to him, that's so interesting. And in your porn, you're looking at a dominatrix parent figure force feeding a sub to eat something that doesn't taste good. And you eroticized it. And he got it and she got it. And that became part of the work.
So that absolutely makes sense to me. So when you name it, that's very clear. He accepted that. He didn't go, no, you're insane. It's got nothing to do with that. Did he accept what you were suggesting?
Yes, and if he didn't accept it, I would have not pushed it. I probably was wrong, right? It may not be right, but they know when you do. It's almost like dream work. You interpret the dream. The person knows themselves. That feels right. That's all that matters. And then the wife had more compassion for him. I call that erotic empathy, right? I didn't make that up. That comes from Amanda Luderman, by the way. You should interview her sometime, from Canada. She coined the term erotic empathy, and it invited her to remove the disgust response and help her understand where her husband was coming from.
Yes. So the erotic empathy is, okay, I've discovered this stuff. It makes me feel deeply uncomfortable, but now I understand a bit more about where it's come from. I have empathy for it.
Right. So now, right. And then that erotic interest doesn't vanish just because now you understand it. Now, how do we make this work in our relationship? Can you tolerate the fact that I like to watch porn in this way? Do you want to do underwear eating between us? That might be a hot thing. It may not be. Could we talk about it if you don't want to do it? There's so many different ways, but it's a pathway for growth rather than getting stuck in the crisis.
Yeah. So it's not like, oh, now we've named it, it's gone. Oh, I'm never going to eat underwear ever again. No.
No.
So some people might come in and go, oh gosh, Joe's going to cure us. He's going to say, oh, it's about this, and then we're all healed. Do people come in and kind of want you to do a bit of magic wand work?
Yes. Yeah. And how this worked with the straight men who have sex with men in my office is I had a client originally a long time ago, again, composite. Now, he was 10. He was with his male brother who was 15 and male cousin who was 15. And he wanted to feel like one of the guys, and they were chewing gum. And he said, I would like to, can you give me a piece of gum and be one of the guys? And they said, sure, if you perform fellatio on us. And he said, I'm not doing that. And they said, then no gum. So he's 10, he's thinking about it. He's like, okay, I'll do it. Because again, he's only 10. He wants to be one of the guys. The male cousin pulls out his genitals. He goes to put his mouth on it. But before he can do that, they throw him to the ground. They spit their gum out on him and say, you're a fucking faggot. We knew it all along. Get away from us. Never tells his soul. It stays with him. He's keeping this sexual secret. It really isn't sexual, but it happened to be. The vehicle was through sexual shaming. And now online, he's looking at men, imagining them giving, with live webcam, giving them oral sex in his head. And he doesn't know why. And he's compulsively doing this. Wife catches him. They come in crisis. And we go back to that original scene. And he can see that that's what he's returning to, that scene, that crime.
Wow, that's so painful. That's a very painful story.
It's a very painful story. And so what we all do is, to not feel the pain, we anesthetize it by eroticizing it. And that's what he ended up doing. It has nothing to do with an attraction to men.
So people come, I mean, you said you spent 25 years with sex addiction, and you now don't believe in that.
Zero. There's no, we have no research that supports definitively that sex can be an addiction. It can be a compulsion. It can be problematic for all kinds of reasons, but no way is it an addiction.
So it's not like alcohol or drugs okay, that's really interesting. So what led you to that place? Because a lot of people go to Sex Addicts Anonymous. A lot of people say, I can't help it. I have a lot of couples. It tends to be the man, but it doesn't have to be the man. It doesn't have to. In heterosexual couples, I think people think it's men that are addicted to sex and not women. Addicted in inverted commas. That's actually not. I think that's. No, that's not necessarily true. But they come in and then they enroll into something like Sex Addicts Anonymous. But you're saying no, that's not what you believe.
Well, it's the low-hanging fruit, right? Do I have a sexual problem? My husband has a sexual problem. I'm disgusted with him, her, myself. And so you go to the internet, boom, there it all is. And so I understand why people go to that right away. But no, in fact, we now know we have research that shows that the highest self-identified sex addicts are white, older, straight men who are highly religious. So it's a moral tension that they're carrying. And what I didn't like, so I in the sex addiction community, I never agreed that you should move somebody away from their erotic orientation. I used to say to people, okay, they come in and they're compulsively doing whatever. So now you want the goal of a sex addiction treatment is to move them away from that compulsive behavior. But that might be their go-to. It just became compulsive for all kinds of reasons. There may be sexual abuse history. There may be a kink. It may be a fetish. There may be, I started learning about sex and realizing all the nuances. See, in sex addiction treatment, you learn nothing about sex. There's no module that's teaching you that required. They offer it voluntarily, but I think it's really irresponsible of a intervention to be sexual and not know anything about sex. So the clients are, or the therapists are working with their bias. And the more I became aware of sex, I tried to introduce it to the sex addiction community, and nobody was interested. They really accused me of being provocative. And I can be provocative. I'm not saying I'm not, but I was really trying to educate, and they were not. And my last thing, and I'm going to write an article about this now because there was something in the paper or Newsweek magazine here in the States did a story about how conversion therapy, trying to change somebody from gay to straight, which is impossible. But people are, it's also unethical and illegal to do with minors, but people are still doing it under the guise of another name. One of those names is sex addiction. And there used to be therapists that would say, if someone comes in and they feel they're compulsively acting out homosexually, I will provide them sex addiction treatment, which is unethical.
Yes. So it's along the lines of conversion therapy.
Totally. Just name something different, and it's not right.
Yeah. So you're campaigning to get this out there, aren't you? This. So you're sort of, in a nutshell, and I don't want to put your work in a nutshell. You're sort of saying, listen, there's all sorts of ways of looking at this stuff. So let's look at what's behind it. Let's look at
Yes.
the compulsion, the impulse, the psychological makeup, the childhood experiences, and all this potentially goes into what comes out in our erotic fantasy lives.
Which is what we do as therapists, isn't it? Except when it comes to sex, therapists have their own internalized phobia about it. It's called erotophobia, unexamined sex lives, unexamined trauma histories, sexual histories. So when that happens, the therapist then leads the client to what they think is sexual health rather than sitting with the erotic thumbprint across from you that may look nothing like anything you'd ever want to do or would approve of, between consenting adults.
Yes. So I don't think in the UK we're brilliant at it because we're a little bit, so couples come to me and the one thing they don't talk about is sex. So they'll talk about mothers and dogs and children and their issues. And eventually I'll say, well, I think we need to talk about sex. We need to talk about your physical life, your intimate physical life. Do you find that, or people that come to you because you're a sex therapist, do you find some people find it very hard to talk about?
Not the ones that come to me because they're prepared, right? They've seen my TikToks or whatever, they've seen my social media. But yes, I do think that there are two conversations. Esther Perel always talks about this. You have the relationship conversation and the sexual conversation. And it should happen in the first couple sessions. Therapists need to get comfortable asking, how's your sex life? Even if they don't want to talk about it, it's in the room. And every couple has a sex life, whether they're active or not. They have a sexual style, whether they're engaging in it or not. And it absolutely should be talked about. I had a friend who became an MSW, and I said to him, he was like 4 years into it. Said to him, do you ask people about sex? He'll say, well, no, I wait for people to just bring it up. I'm like, oh, do you wait for people to just bring up about sexual abuse or family of origin issue? You just wait and hope that they'll talk about their mother? No, I ask. I'm very direct. Then why aren't you direct with this? It's a bias. It's naivete.
Yes. Do you think it's
because
it's
not having
uncomfortable?
It's uncomfortable because we're not taught it in school. That's the real crime, is that in school it's just glossed over like nobody has a sex life. So we don't have the words.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with you. I was brought up in a church school, as many of us are here. We were definitely not going to be talking about that. Definitely not. We're on the Judeo-Christian thing of, Mary and Joseph and the virgin birth. We're not going to be talking about sides and
Right.
givers and receivers and polyamory and subs and, no way we're going to be. Although a lot of that's probably around, but we're not going to talk about that.
Right. And speaking, that's called purity culture. And what sex therapy, I love the language, it keeps evolving. We don't say, when did you lose your virginity? Right. Because it's now you're talking about intercourse, which may have been unwanted and unpleasant, and you're talking about losing something. So instead, we say, when was your sexual debut? So it doesn't have to be what someone else decides. It's what you might have had. I had a client once, they came to me and they had a son who was 18 and doing, they found him on OnlyFans or something. And he was showing off his feet and masturbating, and they were crying. Like, we wanted his first sexual experience to be pleasurable and relational, whatever it was. And I said to them, what makes you think this is a sexual experience for him? This may have nothing to, he may be doing this because he's attractive and it's an income for him. His sexual
Yeah.
debut could be very different than that. So, and people don't understand that.
Yes, I love that. So then you get to choose. Because
And it
number
should be.
one, you've got this sort of cultural thing of virginity being a prize, and so if you lose it, it's bad, or you can only lose it to Mr. Right or Mrs. Right or whoever, right? Yeah. So I like
Right.
this sexual debut. You get to
Yes.
choose.
Whatever that is, and it may not be intercourse. And my thing about, so as a gay guy in the gay male community, we have a top. The way we have intercourse is there's a top, the one who gives anal sex. The bottom is the one who receives anal sex. And then there's some people are versatile; they can go either way. Some people are more top, so they'll say I'm top versatile, I'll bottom once in a while. Bottoms will say I'm bottom verse, I'll top once in a while. But I've never had any intercourse. I'm 61 years old. It's not erotic to me. It doesn't interest me. I'm not attracted to it. And I felt shame for a long time because people would say things to me like, you haven't met the right guy. You haven't had it done right. You haven't had it done at all. Who hurt you? What kind of trauma do you have? You're immature. No, 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 and no. I just don't like it. But so I coined the term side. If you're not a top and you're not a bottom, then you're a side. And it has taken off the last few years. And gay apps like Grindr has taken it over as a position and credited me and we have 85, no, now we have, sorry, I'm exaggerating, 8,300 men in a private Facebook group who identify as sides. Because I would like straight people to even understand that maybe your penis doesn't want to go into a vagina. Maybe your vagina doesn't want a penis in it. Maybe that's normal for you. We call that outer course, not intercourse.
Outer course, yeah, because you're going to have a beautiful erotic relationship, sexual intimate relationship without necessarily having penetrative sex. You're really challenging some boundaries and some mental barriers and really asking people to look at it in a different way. What got you to this place of because you're very passionate about it. And I mean, in Denmark, it was very funny because it was all great. And then gradually, as it got a little bit more out there and out there and out there, people were like, oh, is it time for tea?
Yeah, as it was like that, it was.
It's time for cake, because you're saying a lot of stuff that some people can be going, what is that? Have you found that reaction from people?
Yeah. I've had to learn over time to tone it down. That, if you can believe it, my presentation was toned down. There was a time where I would show pornography images just so we could talk about what's happening in there and why somebody would get off. It was like workshops on why does this turn people on. But I didn't realize at the time, I showed a half an hour of these clips. And then when I opened the lights, the therapists were outraged with me, so angry, because they had been loaded up with images that they never thought of or didn't want to see. And now I've learned I can't do it that way. I still do it, but we stop after each clip, take a breath. What do you think this might be? Remember, these are consenting adults that I'm showing you, whatever it is. So yeah, it's like I've learned to slow it down and help educate without getting people to be reactive.
Yeah, I mean, I always say to people, if you're all consenting adults, what you do and when you do it is completely up to you. And it's only a problem if you think it's a problem. I mean, people can be doing them dogging in car parks, having a great time, right? Whether they should or shouldn't be doing it, who cares? They're having a great time. They're consenting adults with other consenting adults. It's not a problem. But people obviously come to you and say, we need help, or I need help.
Yes. And it's usually, I feel like I'm a shame reduction therapist all the time, like helping them get rid of their shame. And most clients come in and what they'll want is called an eroticectomy. Can you remove this slice of my brain? Because sometimes people still get off on the abuse they had in childhood. So it's not that they
Yeah.
liked the abuse at the time. It was not it was abuse and trauma and someone else's enjoyment to humiliate you. But as an adult, it can become your erotic part of your erotic orientation. And there's a lot of shame around that I help people accept.
So they come and say, "Can you just what do you got? Erotic erotic."
Eroticectomy? Yeah.
Yeah,
Give me like
that
a,
is. I want you to take this away from me because I'm so ashamed and humiliated by this.
right, and you can't, it's going to be impossible. You can lower the volume, you can not give it much attention, you can add to your repertoire. But maybe it's also fun to say, okay, what happened to me as a child wasn't in my control, but what I'm doing today is in my control and it does please me. And it just became part of one of my interests. That helped me with my own therapy, and it helps a lot of clients with theirs. But I want to make sure I also say this: not everything comes from some pathology in your childhood. In my podcast, the very first one is called The Ropers, and this guy has a wife, and they get into shibaro, where it's beautiful
Oh,
knots
the
that you make,
Japanese art of doing knots, beautiful. Yeah.
and he remembers having an erection in Cub Scouts as a little boy when he learned how to tie knots. That wasn't He didn't become into it. It's when he first discovered he was into rope and tying knots. So some people come this way, no pun intended.
And they come to you and say, is this weird? Is this strange? I get off on, I mean, it's a Japanese art actually, the art of knot tying
Right, and
for
his
an
wife loves it, and yep, it makes her feel comfortable when she's tied down. He likes serving her when she's tied down, and the submissiveness of it. I mean, there's a lot of things people get into, but because we don't talk about it so much and we don't normalize it, it's on the internet. It's easy to find most things that you're into. You can find it on the internet. I'm talking
So
about adult sensual things.
yeah, we're talking about adult content. Um, so what do your friends and family think when you started saying, I think I'm going to be a sex therapist? I mean, were they like, oh, okay, moving on? I mean, what did they? Were people surprised, or were they like,
No,
yeah, you were born to do that?
I think they would say that because being gay, I was sort of out there as being gay and out there about sex. Even when I was a sex addiction therapist, I was still talking a lot about it. So it just was a natural evolution for me to become sex positive and talk about sexual health. And my family kind of thinks that it's expected of me.
So when you told your family you were gay, was it an issue? Were people understand? I mean, was it? I mean, it's you see a lot of men who do they need help with that? Do a lot of them find it hard to?
Believe it
And
or
and
not, yeah, still today in 2024. So I did it. I came out in the 70s. I first came out when I was 11 to my mother, and she just said, "We'll be okay. We'll get this understood." And then she put me in therapy when I was 14 because I was being bullied. And that therapist, by the way, I still talk to him as a friend. I met up with him many, many years. He's like 89. He helped me adjust and feel good about being gay and feel good about my fantasies actually at the time. He was the beginning of that journey. So I had I mean, there was some negativity. My mother thought it was, because back then it was the domineering mother and the absent father that was supposedly making
yes,
boys
that's
gay.
right. Dominating mother that takes you to see musicals all the time. Yeah.
Right, right. Stupid. It's such a stupid thing. It's a dead theory. But yeah, no, I've never. Gay was not an issue for me. I'm also kinky. That was an issue for me. Coming out kinky, coming out as a therapist in that way without telling people what I'm into, other than my close circle and my husband. But I wanted to get rid of the shame around that too. There's nothing wrong with the things I like.
So when you say, I'm not asking you obviously to reveal that, but when you say kinky, what do you mean by kinky?
Right. Kinky is an interesting term because some people find it kinky to do it with the lights on and just do regular missionary sex, right? So this is how we normally define it, but people have their own definitions. A kink is like a role play. It's an experience you're going to have with another person, a power exchange. It could be some kind of exchange between you and one or more people. Whereas a fetish is I'm attracted to a shoe, a jockstrap, panties, and I'm in relationship with that. I need that to get aroused. And with a kink, it's more about an experience with people, something that's going on between the two of you. That isn't
So
like
yeah.
missionary or oral sex.
So something like autoerotic asphyxiation, does that come under kink?
It comes under kink, but now we're getting good research that's saying how dangerous that is. I mean, it's always been dangerous, but even people that are successful and don't die can cause lots of brain damage over time by doing that. So yeah, that's part of kink. Putting something over your head, holding your breath. Doing non-normative things that when you're vanilla, that's the opposite of kink. You wouldn't do. Like choking, can keep spitting on each other's face slapping. Those are the kinds of kinks kind of people get into. Food play, burying yourself in chocolate.
Yes, all sorts of fun stuff.
Yeah. And
Role
which
play,
and what
all that. Yeah, the whole
yeah,
wonderful world of erotic sensations and experiences out there that
and
most people, either hide, or they say no, I don't. They've really dampened it down so that they're not allowed
yeah.
to have any of those feelings.
And a lot of people in the kink community are not having intercourse. They're having outer course. They don't need, sometimes they don't need an erection. Women don't need to become aroused. And if they do, they don't need penetration. It doesn't always lead to that. It mostly doesn't.
I tell you, I think the best thing I ever say to my couples is, why do you think sex is about penetration? Why do you think
Right.
sex is about having a penetrative orgasm? Because Christ Almighty, that's exhausting for everybody because you're so focused on one thing. Can I get an erection? Is she going to have an orgasm? It's like, oh my God, I'm not surprised nothing's happening.
Yes.
It's
Agreed. 100%.
it's it's like that, isn't it? Rather than
Limiting.
expansive.
And it's even worse in the gay community.
Is it?
Oh my God. I don't know why
How is
you have to be a top, you have to be a bottom. Sides will complain that they can't find a partner because people call them boring or, they attack sides.
Oh, you get attacked, what, for being, dull or, not committed?
Yep, not interesting. You're not going to do it my way. Rather than say, "Oh, no problem. You're into that, and I'm into this. See, you have a great." There's like a lot of attacking of each other, criticizing.
So you've been married forever.
31 years. I know it's a long
I
time.
know. Isn't that so? How have you and your husband, you've talked about him, you sound like, how have you kept your marriage vibrant and, together, connected?
It's a great question. Well, my husband has Asperger's, and so I didn't know that when I met him 31 years ago. He didn't either, but I knew there was something different about him that I loved his vulnerability, his honesty. But really, what's helped us is me dragging us to therapy in 3 different occasions. Because that while I'm neurotypical and he's neurodiverse and his brain is an autistic person, we just could not and didn't understand why we were having such difficulty. But what really saved our relationship was the day I realized that he has Asperger's, and he realized it. And then I realized how hard he was trying to be in relationship with me. And because I used to think, you're not trying hard enough. You're just like my narcissistic family and da da da. But I knew in the back of my head he was trying hard. But I thought he was holding back in a narcissistic way. It wasn't. It was as far as he could come. And I learned to really appreciate that. And my family would never do that for me. I don't have one family member. Well, maybe the kids that are now in our family, but any of the adults, zero interest in modifying themselves to be in relationship with me, and he did, and that goes a long way for me.
What do you mean they didn't modify themselves to be in a relationship
If
with
I were
you?
to say to my parents, hey, that really hurt me. I don't want you to talk to me like that, or please don't. They look at me and go fuck yourself. I'm going to do whatever I want. That's the problem for you. And why do you feel this way? And the gaslighting and the lack of accountability and every adult I turn to, even today, would look at me and say, "Well, then it sounds like you might not want to spend time with me because I'm not changing." Whereas my husband's like, "Okay, I don't like what you're saying to me. We're fighting over it, but I'm willing to change."
Yes, because there's no movement in that sounds like a you problem. Let's just go, well, that's you. That's you being over it, come back when you finish your tantrum. There's no psychological movement there.
Yeah, that's what we have been able to have equally. And I think just over time, you just realize I know what our next fight could look like. I know what his lines are. I know where my lines are. Some people's fights go on for all the. We recover more quickly, and when we do have conflict, we rupture less. We don't have as big of a rupture.
It's fantastic. So, just helpful for people. So a lot of clients come in, they're heterosexual, mainly the clients I see, but not totally. But porn use really does feature in the therapy room. Not just men, but it tends to be women saying, I think my husband's a porn addict. I'm really uncomfortable about it. It's ethically wrong. Blah, blah, blah. What would you know, I know it's a blanket thing, but we get very hung up on that.
Yeah.
And I think it's complicated. What do you feel about it?
I get this every day, right? I see mostly straight people. It's funny because people will call my office. I'm gay. I've written gay stuff. I do gay trainings, and they'll call and say, "Do you see straight people?" And I feel like that kid in The Sixth Sense. I see straight people. Like of course I see.
I see straight people.
Right, there's one behind you.
Oh my God.
So, first of all, we don't say porn use. Porn's not a drug. We say porn watching, right? Because what's happening is, and I try to help couples understand that porn, people think it can be an addiction. Porn can't be an addiction. An addiction is something you ingest. It can be compulsive. But it's really more the autoeroticism that threatens the couples. Gays and lesbians don't fight about porn in their relationships. When I met Mike 31 years ago, I knew exactly where his porn was, and I looked nothing like the guys that turned him on. He knew where my porn was. We had magazines and DVDs at the time. He looks nothing like the guys that turned me on. We're not threatened by that. We made our own sex life and understand we have our own autoerotic interests, and that's what couples are fighting about.
So heterosexuals come and say, I'm worried about the fact that he or she is watching porn a lot. What do you and I'm uncomfortable with it because I don't look like that woman, or I didn't know he liked to do this, or
I would say
I don't know if I'm married to.
Yeah, right. Well, because you haven't talked about that. So I normalize that straight people don't talk about what they get off on until way later into the marriage. I help women particularly understand that while she may be socialized to compare herself to these other women, for the guy, he's usually not comparing at all. It's apples and oranges. He's got other interests that can be expressed while staying monogamous, even though for some reason that isn't for some women that's not monogamous. Even men get just as jealous about her vibrators as she gets jealous of his porn because it feels like they're replacing themselves. And it's not a replacement, it's an addition to. And it's about masturbation. The way porn and even sex toys can be problematic is if you get used to your own timing, your own hand, your own orgasm, how long, it doesn't judge you, it's unconditionally giving. Well, people aren't like that. So when you move the toy away, get the porn away, now we're together. I'm going to be judged. I'm vulnerable. I'm scared. My parts don't work. Like that's what it is.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I really hear that. Yeah. So that helps people get a sense of what is, because people sort of feel exactly. A lot of women feel that their partner's being unfaithful to them.
Yes, I know. It feels like he's cheating on me, is what they'll say. And I try to help her understand what it brings up for him, but I don't sit as a therapist and say what good porn is, what bad porn is, should he do it, shouldn't he do it? That's not my job. Of course, couples want you to do that. My job is to help you find an answer that may not even exist on this planet right now. I don't know what that answer is, but I'm going to facilitate for the two of you this discussion. And if he puts it away and says, I'll never do it again, because straight guys do this. I'm sorry, I don't want you so dysregulated. I'm going to put it all away and never do it again. What is he doing 6 months later? And she finds it.
Oh, yeah, now absolutely.
It's not, right? And it's not about the porn. Now it's about you lied to me. But he had to lie because when you forbid your partner, you invite secrecy.
Yes, because then it's like, I can't believe you've betrayed me. And of course, the point is that when the person says, I'll never watch porn again, you've already set it up to go horribly wrong.
Yes. Yes.
Well, it's like people come in for family therapy and say, I can't believe my children lie to me. And I'm like, why can't you believe that? Are you seriously telling me you can't believe your children lie to you? I think it's totally believable that children lie to people. We all lie to people.
Yes, yes.
Because of course we know we shouldn't be taking money out of our parents' purse, but you want to buy something and all your friends has it, so you nick that 10 quid. And then your parents go, did you take the £10? And you go, no. Start spending.
Yeah. Porn addiction is a real thing, though. You probably see it too. And then what I also do is what we started out this session about, this podcast, is help understand the non-sexual reasons of what he gets off on, what he's looking at. And then that becomes more palatable. Oh, he has an unmet need or a trauma abuse history or whatever it is, and that's what's going on while he's watching that. It's not about objectifying women. It's about allowing him to express a part of himself that he can't express with me, or I don't want to express with him. Sometimes that happens.
Yeah. Have you seen issues and problems change over the years you've been working in this area? I mean, when you started out, were people coming and talking about polyamory, ethical non-monogamy, thruples?
No, although the gay male culture has always been open. 50% of gay male couples have a successfully open relationship. So in that sense, no, but it's really, I've seen the progression almost 10 years ago of couples just getting married, straight couples coming in and saying, okay, we're 4 months in, let's talk about opening up our marriage. Whereas a lot of therapists would find that to be problematic. I understand it, that they have a secure enough attachment and they want more variety in their relationship. I look for pathology. I'm a therapist, but I don't assume that it is.
Yes. Yeah. So that's been quite a shift, hasn't it? That people are coming in and being more open about, let's say, opening up the marriage.
Yes.
Any other shifts that you've noticed? You said something which was very funny about where are you on the pecking order? Like you're now like, you're just about, you're seen as being a bit old hat or something. You're a white male. I can't remember what you were saying.
Yeah, that's really changed in the community where so I'm white, I'm male, I'm gay, I'm cisgender, and the New York Times did an article about I'm part of the gay triarchy now, which is the the LBT people in our community say, listen, you sit down now. We don't want to hear from you anymore. We want to have our voice. And I recognize why they are saying this because it historically has been the white guys and the males pushed out front because nobody would listen to lesbians, bisexuals, or trans people. They would listen to us. So now today, there's more of a voice and more of an open ear to hear the other alphabet. But yeah, I was saying that it's frustrating for me because I still have things to say. I'm not going to stop talking, but I'm not talking for another culture. I'm talking, I'm just reporting what's going on in our community. Yeah, so I think the first disliked population is straight white cisgender men, and then the gay white cisgender men seems to be the second one.
You're the gay triarchy.
I know.
Well, listen, I know you've got a hard deadline. It's been lovely hearing your voice. We could talk forever. There's so much more I want to ask you. I remember also you were saying that you're a gay man, but you occasionally a woman walks past you and a bit like, whoa. So you're exploring and talking about all sorts of areas that are fascinating. Because do you want to say a little bit about that? Because that was interesting.
Yeah, it scared me at first, right? Because my perpetrator was female, and I was always told in the 70s that, you're gay because you hate women, because of the perpetrator, blah, blah, blah. That's not why I'm gay. But what I started experiencing in my 50s was fluidity. That's what it's called. You can be heteroflexible, mostly attracted to the opposite sex, but sometimes the same sex comes around and you're a little fluid with that person in that time and that place. And you could be homoflexible. And I've never been with a woman, but would have never believed that in my later years, I could even imagine thinking about being with a woman that way. So it's called fluidity. It's okay.
Fluidity. I love that. And I think we're much more embracing of that, especially with the younger generation. Like my kids don't even define as, heterosexual or whatever. They just, it's like we love and desire who we love and desire. And I'm all good to go with that. We're good to go. Great, healthy. Thank you so much, Joe.
Thank you, Lucy, for having me.
A pleasure talking to you.
Same to you. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you.